Okay.
Yeah, we're going to go.
Okay, great.
Okay, guys, listen up. Thanks so much for coming. It's my immense pleasure that we have Team Coldplay in the house today. Will, magnificent drummer with the band, live sound team, Dan and Miller and Anthony. Thanks so much for joining us, helping us out, and with this exciting guest workshop today. We're trying to do this once a week, bring in some exciting guests from different parts of the music industry, performers, producers, all kinds of people. And it's a mega pleasure today to have Will and the team with us at Rhythm Studio. So thank you. Right over.
Use my notes. It's not this long, don't worry. It's just this big. So yes, my name is Will. I'm the drummer in the band Coldplay, and with me today is Dan Green. As Chris said, Dan has been our live sound engineer since our second ever show, actually, the Dublin Castle, February of 1998. But I think Dan was only about 17.
Yep,
time.
like that.
He's working illegally in a pub, doing sound engineering, and he's been with us pretty much for every show since then. So close to 20 years now. And Matt Miller, aka Miller, who is our has been with us about 15 years since our second album, and was really instrumental in helping us develop what we're going to try and talk to you about today, which is how to get the work that you do in the studio sounding great in a live format. So whether you're playing in clubs or pubs, as we started with, or stadiums, or TV shows, radio shows. And Miller also now lectures on this exact subject at another music school, so he's probably a bit more able to take this kind of lecture than I am, in fact. So yeah, we want to try and explain a little bit about how you spend a long time crafting your music in a studio and spending a lot of time on performance and sonics, and then you want to try and take that into a live experience. You don't want to sacrifice any of the sort of sonic quality of the record, but you also want to be able to have it flexible enough so you can inject some that sort of live feeling, the thing that you can't really replace in live music. So how do we do that? And, well, we're lucky enough because Dan and Miller are often around in the studio when we're recording in the first place. They've been part of the decision-making process right from the beginning. So Dan has also written tracks with us, and so he's been involved in the source when we're choosing bass drum samples or choosing tempos or structure. Dan has been there right from the word go. So when the time comes to switching over to playing it live, he's got it all. He knows the dynamics of the song, he knows the structure of the song, and he was, for the most part, helping out programming beats and things like that. So it's great for us because it's a super quick transition from studio to the live arena. So I thought, as an example, we'd use a song from our not quite previous album. How many is it?
Toga?
Yeah. From 2012, a song called Paradise. And so if we can play a little bit from the album. Something like that. So obviously we spent that particular song, about, I'd say, close to 2 years trying to finish. From its very early inception, from when Chris came into the studio one morning saying, I've got this great song. And actually I can tell you, funnily enough, must have been about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a contestant on the X Factor called Stacey Solomon. Does anyone remember her? Anyway, she... Chris, I think, bizarrely came in and said, I was thinking about Stacey Solomon last night. I guess he was watching it on the telly. And the next morning he came in with this song. I think he had some sort of epiphany And so this song, you can't tell anyone about this, but it was possibly inspired by or written for her. But then we said you can't give that song away. We have to have it. So we obviously spent about 2 years tracking it and arguing about it, arguing about tempos, arguing about drum sounds, string sounds. Should we have live strings or not? Is it the right structure? We spent weeks actually tracking it. We were working with a crazy German producer called Marcus Strauss, who was into this idea of making tempo maps. So rather than sticking with one tempo throughout the whole song, he would think, well, coming into the, you still want to play to a click, so you're still having, it's quite a rigid tempo, but he would say, well, I think we need a bit of a ramp up into the chorus, so let's budget up by 0.25 of a BPM, or let's budget up 3 BPM. And so we ended up with these very strange sort of tempo maps. So it would still be to a rigid tempo, but it would drop going into the verses and then pick up. So it was an incredibly intense experience trying to record this song. But we wanted, obviously, when the song was finished, we got to take it out into the live world, and we got to play it in front of people, potentially, big stadiums full of people, and it became one of a popular song for us. So we had to try and work out how could we make it sound true to the record, so it's still recognisable and still has the elements that people love, but make it feel like a much more live, and give us the freedom to and a bit of spontaneity to play it live. And I think in years gone by, I suppose, without the technology we have now, if you wanted more layers of music, you need more people, you need more players on stage. If you wanted to have a string sound, you need to get a string section and put them on stage. Or if you want keyboards, you need a keyboard player to play and bring them on stage. But we only ever wanted the 4 of us on stage. So fortunately, technology now allows us to recreate that kind of thing in a live environment without having to crowd the stage with loads of people. So the first thing, maybe if we can just play a snippet of the live version. This was recorded this would have been our last show in San Diego, which is about a week ago. The added benefit of 60,000 people singing along, which always makes the recording sound a bit better. So the first thing we think about is tempo, and sometimes a tempo that works in a studio. What is the tempo of that?
It's 70.
70, or 68.75. Sometimes it works. The tempo that works in the studio isn't going to work live for various reasons. Sometimes, depending on where you play it in the set, if you're playing this song after a quick song, this song sounds really quite pedestrian. Or if you're playing it after a very slow song, it can have the effect of sounding too rushed. So you've got to think about where it's going to appear in the set. This one actually we ended up sticking with the tempo, and I think we tend to find that when we play live, everything is pushed a little bit, even though the tempo is the same. It's still the energy and the adrenaline and all of the excitement of the show tends to make you push your playing anyway. So you're still playing to the click and you're still playing to the tempo, but you're sort of playing at the front of it, so it has that feeling of energy and urgency. So we settled on a tempo, and then we decided. I've used the same click pretty much since the second record.
Yeah, exactly.
It used to be that when we wanted to do our first album, there was no Pro Tools, didn't exist, Logic didn't exist, none of it was possible. So we'd have to get a little drum machine like a Boss or a Dr. Rhythm, one of those old drum machines, record that onto tape, and then play to that so you could adjust the tempo. But then once Pro Tools was started to become usable, we settled on, in the studio, a click which was, have you ever played, has anyone ever played to a click? Do you have the idea of playing to a click? I found that I struggled with a lot of early click, like metronomes, things like that, things that didn't give me much information. And so we worked on a way of trying to get a click which was inspiring to play to, something that felt more like playing to a great percussionist or something, having the world's most accurate percussionist sat next to you. So I was wanting to try a little experiment. I know there are a few drummers in the house. So is there anyone that would mind helping me with an experiment? Go on. Have a seat. I'm going to try and... Do you play drums to click? Often? Not really? Okay. Well, as a quick experiment, I've got two, or it doesn't matter what you use there, but they're going to be at what tempo?
70, yeah.
So same tempo. Whatever groove you want to play, it's at 70 BPM, and we'll give you two different versions of the same tempo click. We'll see how we go. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. That's the sort of straight out of the box Logic click, or is it a Pro Tools click? So now my click, the one that I play to, the one that I hear for 2 hours a night for the last 18 years, is this one. So you get the same groove, it's more helpful. Doesn't matter if it's
both the same, but
yeah,
the second one it's more fun to play.
More fun to play too. More information as well, right? You've got with the first click, there's a lot of space, and some drummers prefer that because you can sort of you can move in and out of the groove, and you can but you can always, if it's like a noise that sounds like that sticks out, you can always sort of find your place. But I find with the click that I use, more information is better, and so you have much more references, faster pace, 16s and sometimes even more. And then, so thank you very much for your help. So yeah, we have clicks that are based on this. There's a shaker and a tambourine, which are doing the faster notes, and then there's rim shots, which are marking marking the time, but also accent something on a downbeat, so you've got, rather than just, because in a situation where you've got sound flying around a big stadium, sometimes for Chris, if he's running out in the middle of the audience and he's standing maybe 50 yards in front of the speakers, he's getting click in his ear, but he's also hearing sound through the speakers, which can be delayed up to a sort of second and a half, so you're getting really a lot of mixed timing references. So sometimes we have to have there are little cues along the click. So some people use little vocal cues. Someone records something in, just saying, chorus 2, 3, 4, so you know when to come in. So yeah, the click accents are important, and also we're talking about feel. This idea of you can. We've got an example of that a bit later, but the idea of the feel of a click is crucial, because with those simple quarter notes or whatever they are. You guys probably know better than I do. But they give you reference, but they don't give you any idea of feel. And you can really manipulate the click to make it much easier to play a certain groove. If the groove is if it's really swung, if it's really, if it has, a shuffle to it, you can adjust your click so it's much easier to play. It's like playing with a great percussionist. And even though that sound is quite. I have these in-ear monitors, and it's in there for the whole show pretty much. I find that if I'm playing well and if I'm happy, I just don't hear that click at all. It's just part of it is like just having a great percussionist sat next to you. So the only time I really hear it is when we're going wrong, or if someone's pulling out time. So yeah, with that, the click feel and counts, we've done that. So then we have to think about what can we play live? There's 4 of us obviously on stage. I'm responsible for all the rhythm stuff. Guy, our bass player, plays keyboards as well. Chris likes to hoon around the stage, so he doesn't like to be sat behind the keyboards too much or behind the guitar. And Johnny's our guitarist, is obviously is nailed to where he is because he has a pedal board which is about the size of this drum riser here. So we have to, obviously things like strings and things like big pad sounds or any kind of weird sort of vocal samples or things that are almost impossible for us to play live, we have to rely on some sort of tracking. And so in that particular song, we've got to try and work out what can we play feasibly, the four of us, and then what's missing, what do we need, where do we need to fill the gaps in it. So in this particular example, in that song we've got the keyboard sounds and the string stuff which came straight from the recording of the album, so we can just sort of lift it up and put it into the live show session. So we've got pad sounds which and we can add the strings, the live strings that come in. And we can add this guy's bass system. That's kind of layered with Guy's live bass. It adds a bit of fuzz and a bit of sort of cut. And then and then obviously there's some backing vocals that we use actually on track. Maybe Dan, do you mind just sort of having a quick talk about that? You know, like just in terms of
yeah. So basically, sometimes we've got the studio vocals and they sound a bit too studio-ish. So we'll get like an SM58 and lay down a load of live ones.
yeah. So we sort of they're because especially because I do a lot of the backing vocals and it can be difficult to project live vocals from behind a drum kit because you're getting so much noise from the kit. Getting any kind of clear signal out into the stadium is quite tricky. So it's a blend of me singing live and also singing the backing vocals as live but recorded onto track. So they should sound something like this. So, and then I suppose when we started, because we didn't have this technology, and there were, and in fact, perhaps our music didn't really need this sort of depth in it at the time. We just had four instruments, and I think at the time we were very kind of averse to using any kind of recording or any kind of. We wanted everything to be played live on stage, and I think that's still the case. As much as possible, we try and do as much as we can like that. But at a certain point, you have to think about the audience. Think about what's best for the audience. Do people want to hear a slightly sort of not so good version of the song, or do they want to hear, especially in these big places that we end up playing, you want something that fills, the sound. It fills the room, and people, that's the thing that people want from those big stadium concerts, especially, is to be filled with sound. So we try, as I said, we try and do as much as we can live, but then we don't mind using a little bit of help in order to create some real dynamics and to create hopefully some really stirring moments in the concert. So then so we've got tempo. We know that we've got the stems now. We know exactly for each song we've got a version prepared. And then we start thinking about, there's a lot of, in the last maybe 3 or 4 albums, we've been using a lot more drum programming. Obviously still playing a lot of live drums, but often playing live drums and then cutting them out and sampling and looping and manipulating them slightly. But a lot of the live programming can be quite difficult to replicate with just acoustic sounding drums. And obviously, drum kits sound great. They've been perfected over years and years, decades to sound great, and we have great microphones that make them all sound fantastic. But because we're sort of influenced more recently by a lot of modern sounding records, we want to try and bring that same aesthetic to our, that sort of sonic clarity that you can only get from electronic sounds. But how can we do that without sacrificing performance and without sacrificing that sort of live feel? So, and also, does the drum sound have to be the same for each song? For obviously your kit generally sounds the same. You sit on the same kit for the 2 hours, but can you do something to each song to make each one have a slightly different identity? Can you make it sound different and sound that'll leap out and sound? Because I think people can get fatigued after a while hearing the same. Certainly, in a lot of electronic music, you can sometimes, if over a long period of time, it becomes, your ears get used to it, and you want to hear a bit of, something different, a bit of depth. So, on our fourth record, we started working on a couple of songs that had very unique sort of drum identities, particularly either very distorted live drums played, treated for distortion, or using loops and things like that. And it got us thinking, how do we do that live? So the first iteration of it was using these E drum triggers, so on each drum and on the kick drum and snare as well. But at that time, we only had the technology really to go into the sort of the brain that these things connects to, and then choose you could load in a sample, but any kind of variation you needed, someone who basically was Miller, in fact, was under the stage with his hand on the dial, changing pattern, changing program, changing banks of sounds, sort of on the fly. But then we sort of, but Miller's probably better equipped to explain. We changed to using computer-based software instead. So.
I have quite a different role in many ways to both these guys, because their primary objective is an artistic one, but because I'm essentially a tech or a roadie and I am responsible for the equipment, all of my decisions, rather than how good it sounds or what it adds to the music, all of my decisions begin with, is it going to work every night? And am I going to have to explain why it's going wrong? So we started, everything we start as simply as we possibly can. And then very, very quickly it becomes as complicated as anyone can imagine, but for the right reasons, basically. And yeah, we started with the D drums, because you had a song called Violet Hill, didn't you? Which was, the drum sound was like a very roomy, super compressed, distorted thing. And the best way to do that was, I think we actually used samples of those sounds from the album. So we used the room mics and had them running off the D drum. And the D drum brain, from my point of view, was fantastic because it was made of metal, it was super reliable, it was really, really sort of bomb-proof. But as the more we used it and the more we tried to do with it, every time we wanted to change something and add new sounds to it, it was a really, really long process. And we used to have to plug MIDI cables in and do this thing called sample dump standard, which hopefully none of you will ever have to experience because it's horrific. And all of that has kind of gone away. So for the sake of flexibility and being able to offer up as many options as possible, we went over to running things in computers and in Ableton Live. But the other side of the coin comes in there, where we've got all this flexibility, but you have to really tend to computers to stop them crashing. And computers crashing in the studio is annoying and it interrupts your creative flow. But in front of 60,000 people or in front of a TV audience of millions, it really interrupts things, So we had to try and develop something that was bomb-proof. So we've got we've got a main and a spare of everything. And we also have this Ableton system for the drums, where it works. We tried to set it up so it works in the same way as the D drum brain, but it just allows us to do much, much more. So we still have these triggers on the drums. They all come into my Ableton computer, and then each trigger I can layer up samples onto each trigger, and we also have this Pro Tools system running which can switch sounds, because sounds can come in and out, and particularly with a very produced record, you may have like a very big sounding chorus, and then it may get small for the verses. And we did used to do that with the D drum brain, and I did used to have to stand there, and I knew for every song I would be changing. And as somebody who gets distracted very easily, that was a particularly tricky job. So we finally found a way of making the computers do that. And are we going to go into latency now, or should we do that?
Yeah, certainly.
Because that was, I mean, that was the biggest issue with the going from the D drum brain to Ableton stuff was. Does anybody know what latency is? Do people experience that when you're using plugins and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And again, that's something that you can compensate for in recording, and you can nudge things around and get them all lined up. But live, you have to try and get things as tight as you possibly can, particularly if you're layering sounds. Because if we were layering bass drum samples, I don't know if anybody's ever stacked up bass drum samples and found themselves disappointed because all the low end disappears. And this gets quite scientific and quite dull, but there's this thing of if you have low frequency signals combining and they're not perfectly in phase, you get cancellation and all the low end disappears. And that's to do with latency. So we had to work a long time to try and reduce all of the things in the computer system. So we had this great thing that was hugely flexible, and anything that they asked me to do, I could do, but we had to eliminate all these problems as well. And it took us quite a long time to kind of get it all dialed in. But I think, kind of touch wood, we're in a place now where we've got the best of both. We've got very low latency, and we've also got great flexibility to do things, and it's been super stable as well, which again, touch wood.
Yeah, so we now, there are a few songs that require something, a very particular snare sound, for example. We'll show you in a sec. The Paradise song triggers a clap. And so there are certain songs where that kind of thing is really crucial. There are other songs where you just want a more sort of natural sounding drum kit. But we sort of, once you hear the sound of a mic'd up acoustic snare drum layered with a clap, it sounds amazing. So we think, well, why can't we then find something that can sit under or support the main snare throughout the gig, so it just bolsters the kit sound a bit. It can add dynamics, it can add a bit of weight. If snares can change throughout a 2-hour show, they can you can really change the tension in the lugs. If you're giving it some welly, it will just start to drop in tuning. So something that sits underneath it that reacts exactly the same. It's triggered by every hit. And it's very velocity sensitive, but it just provides a bit of something underneath it which will either thicken it up or just sort of keep it super present. And as Miller said, we do a lot of because we run a lot of stuff to click. We can do a lot of changes within the song. So a song can have. There's one song we had on our previous album where the snare sound actually changes every beat. So I think there's like 6 different snares or something, and it cycles through them. So where previously Miller would have to be literally flicking them every single snare beat, now we've got that automated, so it flicks over. So now we have a system of general kind of triggers on each one, which just allows us to have a bit of a sort of a fatter sound. And maybe we've got that. So if I can play you that same Paradise drum beat, but with no triggers, so that this would be what it would sound like, just acoustic drums. So you've got that. everything has got slightly flatter, a bit more fizzle. That help? Much more presence and much more sort of smack. So that's the sample that we use throughout the gig on the snare drum. So hopefully it should then, I mean, let's hope that it's going to work live and there's no latency. I'm going to put my earplugs in. My ears. Is that coming back out now still? That's the gig. Yeah. And if you just goes the clap. Sorry, it's quite loud. So that's the trigger that has the clap sound and layered with the snare as well. Is that too loud? Sorry. There you go. Right, so that's that. We mentioned earlier about so that's it, yes. Sort of click feel, and how it can be, if you're trying to play a song that's swung or has some sort of shuffle, having a straight click can be quite uninspiring. And so there's another one, the song on the most recent record called Adventure of a Lifetime, which has a sort of a very swung feel. Can you play that? Can you play that? Or just can you play the little snippet of the song? Just nothing too loud. It's got a bit of sort of swing in there. And when we first started recording it, I was trying to track the drums. We probably just played to a straight click, which sounded something like this. Hopefully. So with the percussion, but yeah, exactly. So it's quite really, it doesn't have that same feel. So then we tried to alter the click basically to try and, because it's quite hard to play to, if you've got that much straight sort of shakers and 16ths, that it's difficult to sort of it's difficult to swing over the top of that. So if we change the 16ths to be swung, hopefully, you see that difference? It's just slightly. Can you switch between them? Yeah. That's one. There's a little bit more of a straighter. And then that shape is much more slightly subtle difference. But it can get really tiring for people listening to that clip after too many times. What else have I got here? Oh yeah, there's another song which we can just quickly demonstrate. Gives us a bit of using the pads, the pad sounds and the live triggers as well of the acoustic kit, which is so Talk about Him for the Weekend, which is again from the most recent one. And that should hopefully be working. Is it going to work then?
Yeah, I think so. Just from the top.
Just a sec. And the idea of this was, obviously we could just, there are people, in fact, friends of ours who get paid huge amounts of money to go up to Las Vegas and just sort of press play on their IMAX and accept their $1 million for the night. Just because it is so, it is with computer music, and it is very easy to just go up and press play, and no one will know the difference. But what we try, how do we use the sounds that we really enjoy, but giving them some sort of live feel. So a lot of the stuff we try and play a lot of the recorded beats, a lot of the program beats, so it gives it a slightly sort of freer feel, but hopefully it still maintains a bit of sonic quality. All right.
Yep.
Thank you. There were two clap samples that were automated, changing from the verse to the bridge section and then back into the chorus. Same snare sample, same clap sample is on this trigger as well. Kick drum sample, Dan tends to use either one or the other because, as Miller was saying, with low end frequencies you get a lot of, if they're not absolutely bang on, you get a lot of phasing and weirdness. So we either tend to, depending on the song, we either use the live microphone kick drum or whatever the sample is. I think in that one we tend to use the sample.
Yeah, that's like electronic punchy sound.
Yeah, so it still has the feel that it's performed, but it's got
Weight,
a bit of weight and sonic cloud. So you can take your earplugs out now. Sorry, I won't be playing anymore. So that's kind of what I've got really in terms of how we go about taking something from the album, trying to make it work live, but maintaining what's good about the recordings and the things that we slaved over for years, but also knowing that after 20 years rehearsal, we're quite a good live band now, and it's not the case from the start, absolutely. But trying to get as much of the best of both worlds, trying to get sonic clarity and great sounds, but also trying to work hard to, on performance and making sure that the live energy comes across. And really, the greatest thing for us has been working with the same people for all these years, and those people being integral in the writing stage. So when it comes to, quite often, we would find, we only really did one show without you, so but a lot of people find they they have great songs and they work hard in the studio, and then you go and play them live, and the audience is really in the hands of the sound engineer, because if they don't have an understanding of where certain songs peak, or where the emphasis of the song is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be more emphasis on the lead guitar or on the drums, whatever, a bad sound engineer can really hamper your gig, and it can make it difficult for the music to come across. So I suppose that would be my parting word of advice, is to try and keep your team together, try and work with people that you trust musically, and also, like Dan and Miller have, they were always very tech aware, but the amount that they've learned since we've started, in the same way that we've improved as musicians, hopefully, they have upped their game, and every time we took a step up with our, having to play bigger shows or whatever it is, they've stepped up their level of knowledge. They're tireless in finding new technology. We ask them to do ridiculous things. We're constantly demanding that can we get this? How do we do that? Can we, and they're always coming up with. They're always saying yes, and they'll find a way. And they really are the sort of. Without their skills, our live shows would be absolutely appalling. So, that would be my advice: is try and work with people who you trust, work with musicians, and people who can understand your music, and then perhaps try and get those people to learn the tech rather than having. You can have the greatest technical minds, but if they don't understand your music, then it can be a real barrier. So I'm just grateful that Dan and Miller have been with us for all this time, and I hope you have learned something of use. Thank you very much. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I mean, you're probably more likely to ask these guys. But if there are any questions that you have at all, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
You spoke about people being involved in your creative process. I wanted to ask, how does the production rights of the songs that you produce and the result of your creative process, how is that shared between your band?
Great question. Well, first and foremost, from our first record, we worked with a producer who was very much a sort of traditional producer kind of character. They provided engineers, and he was contracted by the record company to produce our album. And back in those days, it was a lot of his job was actually quite. A lot of it was sort of managing stuff and managing where the location and storing and notating of the master tapes and that kind of stuff, and delivering them to the record company. And I think maybe from the second album on, we were always co-producing our records. I think we would try and find people whose aesthetic we enjoyed, and we share the production credits with them, and we share some with Dan as well. Yeah. And Rick, who's our other engineer, who's worked with us again since we started working with him in 2002. But we don't want to sort of underestimate what we bring to the production side of it, because we spend a lot of time. It's actually a lot of fun examining how to get your music across and trying to come up with new ways of doing things. But it would be also foolish to underestimate the role of people like Dan and Rick. And also, normally, Dan and Rick are kind of with us at all times. We have a studio not far from here, in sort of Hampstead, which is sort of full time. We can go whenever we want, which is amazing. It's a real luxury. And then we normally work with one or two producers per album, or generally it tends to be mostly for the whole record. Sometimes we've done one or two where maybe 8 tracks have been with one guy, and then 2 songs have been done with someone else. But it's done on a track by track basis, but we're always very careful to make sure that we do. If people work hard and contribute, you have to respect that, and you have to reward that, I guess. So we try and be as fair as possible, but also never underestimate that a lot of the time, quite a lot of it comes from us or within our camp. Yeah.
I was just wondering, as far as writing, do you ever write when you're on tour, or do you write when you're back home? Or, how long does it take to make an album?
Well, this time, what's great actually on this tour, as of the beginning of this year, we've had a mobile studio. Because we're lucky, because the buildings that we play in are quite big, so there's often quite a lot of room. And so there's normally a room about this size somewhere backstage, and look like it's normally some sort of American football dressing room or something that's all draped out. And we have a guy who basically every morning sets up a mobile recording studio. So we have a drum kit there, keyboards, guitar amps, a piano, everything just kind of gets wheeled out in crates, and we arrive at the gig, we do our sound check, and then we spend an hour in the studio every day. So it's an amazing, it's a real luxury. So we do get a lot of writing done on the road, and I think, in days gone by it would be a bit more writing in sound checks, but ultimately that really affects the sort of the end product as well, because if you're standing on it, if you're trying to write, you're on a huge stage, with massive empty stadium, you're less inclined to be playing sort of delicate, folky, acoustic music. You want to smash the drums and hear them reverberate throughout the arena. So I think sometimes writing in sound checks, sometimes it yields great stuff, but you can only really write music that seems to sort of work in those environments. I think the effective environment on writing is really quite noticeable, I would say. So yeah, we used to just have guitars and stuff on a tour bus, and that lends itself a lot more to playing more sort of stripped back acoustic stuff. So it's definitely something to consider where you write. But we're lucky, as I said, we're lucky to have the studio that comes on tour with us, so we can do a lot of that every day.
And you mentioned that one of the songs took like 2 years. Is that just a one-off, or?
I'm afraid not. We've had a few. There's always one. Every album, there's one song which is an absolute pain to get right. On the first album, the song Yellow was our sort of the first song that got us a passport around the world, really. We were very lucky. But that song took, again, that's for about 18 months. We're mostly arguing about tempo. And when you get into a studio, I guess I don't know how many of you guys are in groups or whether you would work on your own, but when you're having to when you have 4 people and a producer and an engineer and other people who have all got opinions, it can be quite diplomacy is quite important. And we were arguing. I remember being absolutely miserable because we were having this huge argument about the tempo of Yellow, and it was literally arguing about 1 or 2 BPM, something to 74 or 76, and people storming out, trashing kitchens, and you're ruining the song, and it's sometimes you need to take a step back or just try and compromise. I think we probably ended up right in the middle, 75. But yeah, so that kind of thing. That took a long time, and then on the second album, the song In My Place, again, it's normally about tempo for us, because you hear it, especially, I don't know if you have this we call it demoitis. When you hear the first version of a song you hear is always the best. You always think, it doesn't sound as good. It hasn't got that little hiss, or it hasn't got that crackle in the background, or all the things that you come to love about a song when it's being born, you end up trying to chase. And so, and also when you're demoing things, you tend to not think. Well, certainly our experience, you don't tend to think about the finished song. You tend to try and if you're writing on piano, you use all 10 fingers because you're trying to cover bass, you're trying to cover melody, you're trying to cover rhythm as well. And so you can end up just leaving no space. If you love, we try and play on some of the demos that Chris might bring in, and there's just no space for anyone, because he's done it all. He's got the whole band on his keyboard. So it's normally about tempo for us, and that's what can take time. So. And sometimes the song is just not working. Everything's. We work with a guy called Brian Eno, who was a sort of legend for us. He worked with Talking Heads and U2, Bowie in his finest period, And he's an amazing guy, extraordinary producer, but he's not very musical at all. In fact, he's more like a sort of painter. He has these weird. You can just see a piece of music, and he can tell why something's wrong, something's missing, even if it's something so subtle. But he sort of sees things in a completely different way. And he was what song? That's it. Yeah. So we had that song was quite a straightforward. It had a very straightforward structure: intro, verse, chorus, breakdown. Just a standard sort of thing. The bit that is now at the beginning was the sort of middle eight, and for the 6 months he was saying there's something wrong with this song. It's not working. It's too linear. And so he said, just give me 20 minutes. So we all went and had a cup of tea. And we came back and he completely chopped it apart. He put middle eight at the beginning, turned that into an intro. He'd done this really strange treatment on the live strings that were sort of like a weird tremolo delay effect. It completely changed the song. Just the initial impression of the song was so radically different that the rest of the structure could afford to be quite linear. But I think he definitely. Yeah, he took something completely, just chopped it apart and put it back together in a different way, and it just it made a difference immediately.
You like it?
What's that?
You like it?
Initially, you're like, what have you done? But that's the thing, and quite often when you're so close to a song, when you've just been working on something for such a long time, and anyone suggests something, you take it personally, don't you? You take it, you become offended. It's like, what are you talking about? But sometimes having fresh ears to a song. I remember, when we were a young band, it was terrifying when people from the record company would come in and listen. They want to listen to what you've done, and you've been sat in the studio, just the 5 of you or whatever, for months on end, listening to the same thing, obsessing about hi-hat sounds or something really, pointless really. And then one of the guys would come in and you'd listen to the music and it sounds completely different because immediately you're taking off your sort of studio hat. And you're listening to it through their ears, through someone that's never heard it before, and suddenly something that seemed so obvious to you was wrong. It's actually not so much of a problem, or suddenly something that you thought was great sticks out too much, and you think, "Oh, what was I thinking?" So it's interesting having people who you trust to play your music to, and whose opinion you trust is really important. But also, don't be afraid to accept criticism and accept ideas, because if you start a piece of music, if you're always on your own, you always start from the same place, there's only so many places you can go. You need to sort of be open to suggestion and to ideas, exactly, because someone will come up with something which you won't have done. And some of the great bits of music that I'm most proud of have been suggested by someone else, because you're so focused on what you're doing. It doesn't occur to you the obvious thing to do sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
See the mic that you use on the road. What is it? The mic that you use.
Let's talk about
it
depends for what.
Yeah.
What's the cheapest one you play? That's really good enough.
Well, the mic we use the most probably is the SM58, which Chris tracks a lot of his vocals with. And
How much does that cost?
probably about 80 quid, something like that.
80 quid.
About 80,
Is it?
like that.
Or would you use that for for people to listen to?
Yeah,
Okay.
we just use that for everything. You use it, pop it on a snare drum. You use it as an overhead.
Oh, I mean vocals.
Oh, for vocals, yeah. Well, we have got a few posher mics as well.
Yeah.
But Chris will always just come back to the handheld because he'll just sing in front of the speakers, really loud. And he just likes to get in a vibe. Yeah, 80 quid.
Well spent.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Maria. It's a pleasure to be here. And just have a few questions. So how many triggers do you have in your drum kit? 2?
Well, there weren't. So kick, snare, 2 toms. That's on the live kit, and then next door, you come and have a look if you want. Then we've got two pads, and then a SPD which has got 9 potential different sounds on. So we use that setup as well on what we call the B stage, which is up at sort of the end of a big walkway, because it's very difficult to play live drums in front of the speakers, because people right next to you are hearing it acoustically, but then they're hearing the sound from the PA about a second and a half later. So it gets very confusing. So we have to use, when we go out into the middle there, sometimes we play a section of the show right in the back, up in the stand somewhere. So if we do use drums, we use electric drums because they don't have that acoustic thing. It doesn't become confusing. So, but in terms of on the live kit, there's one for each thing. Yeah.
And then I just wanted to ask you, like in your earphones, so do you only have your click track and also the band players and your vocals?
It's a good point. So, yes, I have a good. We all have a different balance essentially. We all need different things. Obviously, Dan is in charge of what the audience hears from the front, but we have a monitor engineer who's down in the little cave down by the stage, and we work. Normally have a couple of weeks of pre-production sort of rehearsals before we start the shows, where for each song we sort of spend a little time with the monitor engineer saying, okay, I need for this song. It's different for each song. So on this one I need a bit more of Guy. And generally I need the bass player, because you want to try and get locked with the bass player. So, but yes, click, and vocal mic, and a bass heavy balance of the other instruments. I need to be able to hear Chris singing because I have to sing with him. I need to be able to pitch to him, and yeah, that's just a good balance. And obviously, because there are things coming off track as well, certain things I need a bit of that in my ears as well. But generally, yeah, it's quite click heavy and bass heavy.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello. My question is related to what Maria is asking. Do you prefer monitors or headphones?
I have to. I don't have mine here, but I wear in-ear monitors. Yeah.
All the time? Or
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
you take it off and
Never.
listen to the monitors?
I can't. No, I think the last time that I played the drums without any kind of ear protection would have been 2001, maybe. Just because I tend, as I'm unfortunately heard, I tend to play the drums quite loud, and even after the first year of touring, I could tell that my hearing was not as good as it was. So especially cymbals are the worst. They just obliterate your high end. So always in-ear monitors, and also because we're playing to click all the time, I can't have monitors because I need to have click coming through there, and it will bleed through onto the stage microphones, which will then come out, so people would hear that. So yeah, we absolutely have to in-ear monitors all the time.
Okay, so you use the clip just in your headphones, and then are the same tracks in the monitors than in the headphones?
Yeah, so it's coming from the monitor desk, and then we almost, in fact, no one on stage uses wedges anymore. We don't use monitors. Guy has one just for a bit of.
But you've got the thumper as well, which is.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So in my stool, in my drum stool, it's got these sort of sub drivers underneath. So it's like you can feel. It's as if you can feel the weight of the bass drum. So it's like a rumble.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hi.
Hey, I'm just curious. So you said that everybody in the band has a clip.
Varying.
Do you have different clips?
No.
Okay. So
No.
you all have the shaker sort of.
Yeah.
Thing on them.
But they tend to have it pretty low.
I'm not sure Chris has the shaker, I think.
They just have quarters.
Yeah.
But this is, I'm just grateful that I have it because quite often, especially when Chris is running around the stadium, because the sound is because of the sound distance the sound has to travel, and sometimes he gets distracted. He's talking to the crowd or something, and then I have to he's not aware that he needs to be singing in 4 beats, and so quite often, well, a few times in the last tour, he's completely missed his cues, and so we have to stop the song. Yeah.
Does that happen? Because
Yeah.
I experienced that with the singer that I'm playing with.
Yeah.
He gets lost.
Yeah.
And then I always wonder, is the better decision to call off the whole thing or to somehow make up for it?
Well, that's happened. I mean, In fact, there was one time, and this talks to Miller's point earlier about that we used to use a different system. We had like a hard drive, Fostex or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we were doing this thing it was at Wembley Stadium. It was one of these Capital Radio big things, and we were opening the show, and we got halfway through the first song, and it glitched, the thing completely, it dropped out about sort of just half a beat or something. So it skipped, and so we were all playing, and and it was a song that had, it might have even been that one, it might have been the Rihanna one. So we had Rihanna's
2 or 3 different fuck ups.
Yeah.
Into one intro.
That was a catastrophe, that gig. But it was one where we had someone out there, I think it was Rihanna's vocal on track, and we were playing, to time, but then I suddenly heard the clip was out of sync, and we weren't playing out of time, but we looked back and something had gone wrong and it glitched, and so she was about to start singing when we weren't, we're out of time basically, so we had to pull the track at that point. I have so behind my kit I have a shout mic, which goes straight through to, doesn't go to Dan, it goes to Miller and his sort of crew down in the pit, the people that are controlling the MIDI tracks. And sometimes I have to shout down there and say, we're going to need to kill the track because Chris is off tempo or whatever, or someone's messed it up.
Yeah. It's always better to start again than to carry on.
I think
bad
so.
version.
I think especially, it's become a bit of a joke now because in fact it turned into something. We turned it into a moment in the show now. There's a bit where it's the sort of we just stop one song, we play the intro, and then we just stop. Because it's actually, what's interesting is when you revisit the song, especially if it's a popular song, if you've messed it up a little bit, people tend to forgive you actually because it's humanizing, especially in these huge concerts where there's fireworks going off and lasers everywhere, and it can seem a little bit removed. But then when you sort of admit that it's not all just, it's not all running like clockwork, it's not just this big machine. Occasionally those moments can really humanize a show, and it can make people feel a bit more connected to it. So now occasionally Chris sort of deliberately messes up a song and says, I have to start that one again. But it's people, it's funny, and it can lighten the mood a little bit as well. Sometimes you can end up taking yourself too seriously in these big shows. So I think we find that it's generally better to, especially if you're playing to a track, it's generally better to start again, because if you now when people record stuff so much, YouTube and everything, if you play badly, it could be around forever. So it's better to just erase and start again. Yeah.
What was playing the Super Bowl like, and how long did you have to prepare?
That was, in terms of amount prepared for time on stage, I would say that's the strangest ratio. I think there was about.
I think we did a good 4 months or so.
I think from when we knew we were doing it, it was about sort of 9 months, or maybe 6 months, for 12.5 minutes on stage. But it's a crazy event, and wonderful in that it's great that you can reach so many people, and lots of people who generally, there's not a massive crossover with American football fans and Coldplay fans, so it's a completely different sort of audience, and it's a monstrously big audience.
Yeah.
But they leave very little to chance now. They've had quite a few issues in the past with things going wrong, and people they can't have any sort of dead air or any mistakes on those big TV shows. So they have. I'll tell you what, I can let you into a secret. In fact, so we spent about 2 weeks recording the show as live. So similar to the way you just heard some of our stuff recorded, we ran the whole show with us, and it was Bruno and Beyonce running the whole show from start to finish, but recording and perfecting those recordings. So they're live recordings, but they can't risk a guitar not working or someone fluffing. So basically, Chris is just singing live to a track that is I think they've done that for the last sort of 5 or 6 years.
I think they've got one commercial break to clear the pitch, wheel in the stage, set everything up, and literally go.
Yeah, 7.5 minutes I think it is from people from the football players still being on it to driving, I think like 12 trucks onto the pitch, opening the flatbeds up, creating the stage, plugging everything in, making sure that we had a youth orchestra, we had 1,000 fans, making sure everyone's in the right place. They've got 7 minutes to build it from nothing. So it's pretty hectic. So they don't want any mistakes. So we spend a lot of time working because you've got to try and represent what you're about as a band in 12 minutes. It's like a medley. It's like a sort of I remember we played a minute of this song and then a weird sort of transition into 2 minutes of another song and then transitioning one song to throwing it over to Bruno for him to do a sort of short version of his thing with his whole dance crew, and then over to Beyonce, and then back to the middle. So it happened so quickly, and it was over so quickly. But once the hard work for us, for me, I knew that I wasn't playing live. I have the deadhead things on my kit, and it was just a lot of fun. Chris it was much harder for him. He's singing live, and he's got to hit certain points. They've spent 2 weeks blocking out the cameras, so we know at this point the camera's going to swing down, so he has to be exactly on this spot. And if he's not there, it's going to, he might get a shot on the back of his head or something. So it's incredibly intensely choreographed, and also there's so many people involved in that. There's three musical artists and their sort of musical directors or whatever. Then you've got the video director of the show, you've got the audio director of the show, you've got the NFL guy, the guy who's in charge of booking the artists. You've got the league, themselves, the executives from the NFL who, they don't want anything that clashes with their sort of brand objectives and whatnot. And then you've got the television networks, you've got the advertisers who are all paying something like $1 million a second to advertise within that halftime show. That's the most expensive bit of advertising you can buy on the planet, is to have your advert in the halftime, just before the halftime show starts in the Super Bowl. So they're all saying, well, we don't want them to mention this, or we can't have that, whatever it is, that T-shirt. It looks a bit too much like a Coca-Cola label, and Pepsi is sponsoring it. So it's just so many opinions. To try and get the set list agreed, it took sort of that was months of negotiating. So it's a painful thing logistically to do, but obviously it's an amazing opportunity to play in front of that many people. Hey.
You mentioned how new tech has been able to solve problems in your life set. Maybe this is more relevant than developer. Is there anything still now in your life set that is just a little bit annoying and that you think could be fixed by new stuff?
It's a difficult area, really. The hardest thing, the thing that we come up against the most often is that what we do is a very niche application, and most people that make technology and the kind of products we use can sell 100,000 of something to people who work in their bedroom, and things will very often be made as cheaply as possible and for mass production. And we're always looking for things that are really, really sort of robust and are totally about working. And in the live sounds side of things, like mixing desks and PAs and video screens, there are companies who make devices that are purely for that application. And if your mixing desk goes wrong, you phone up the mixing desk company and say, send someone down here immediately, this is not doing what it should. But the most difficult thing about this is nobody really yet makes things specifically for playing live. There are, like that SPDSX is a unit on its own, and that does work for live. But once you try and make things a little bit more complicated than that, you're kind of on your own. And that's really the biggest challenge, is that there's no grown-ups, and you have to kind of feel your own way, and that can be you know, certainly when we started doing things with computers, we had a lot of shows where we were getting to the end of the show and Will and I would have a conversation and say, it will be better tomorrow. And then we had a lot of those, and it eventually was, but there was no one to go to. You know, there was other people struggling with the same problem, and you could get people going, oh yeah, I tried that, and for 6 months it was just a nightmare. But that's the biggest difficulty for me, and it's like I say, you kind of got to make it up on your own, and sometimes that's fantastic because it's, you know, some people do Sudoku, and I work for Coldplay, you know, and you just get given these interesting problems and eventually find a solution. But,
Often we tend to try and go straight to the manufacturers, don't we? We've had, especially with drum stuff, you've got a good relationship with Native Instruments people.
Exactly.
People that create the software are really ultimately they want to put their stuff, their software and hardware, they want to put it in amongst the studios of working musicians. So, and they're often keen to try and find out what the problems are, how you're using it. And so, you know, in exchange for sending us new bits of kit, Dan and Rick have done, you know, tutorials or things where to try and help the manufacturers explain how people are using it in the real world, because you know the guys that make these things aren't necessarily going to be the guys who are going to be using it every day. So we try and foster relationships with them to try and work out, try and let them know, well, this would be great if it could do this, or you know, so when there's a software update, they might manipulate it a little bit. Just so it's nice to have those relationships with people. And hopefully that sort of benefits everyone that ends up using those pieces of kit.
we actually had Gerhard Langling come down to the Sony studios where we did the first Ghost Stories shows.
Who's
And
Gerhard Langling?
Gerhard Langling is the guy who wrote Logic.
Oh,
He was
wow.
the programmer and he did many bits of software that led to Logic.
Mm.
And him and sort of the heads of the audio division of Apple came down, and we showed them around the stage, and then we showed them around our world. And I explained how, and at the time we weren't using Ableton Live, we were using Mainstage. And I showed him our Mainstage setup, and he looked at the head of the audio division, and he looked at me and he said, "Does it work?" And I was like, "Pretty much, yeah." He was like, "How?" And I was like, "You wrote it," you know. And that's the thing is, you know, people write things with one thing in mind, and we tend to go into it, you know, with a particular outcome, and we have to bend all the technology to that outcome. And yeah, when the people who've created that technology see it, they're like, that's not what we were imagining. But it is good, yeah, and it's a massive. It's such a privilege to be able to get email responses from those people. You know, if I was doing a gig at the Bull and Gate and I emailed Apple, I would never hear back from them. You know, but if you know I'm working for a band of this size and I email them and I just say, "This isn't working. Is there anyone that can help?" Generally, they do get back to me. I call it using the C word if I put Coldplay in an email, and people do generally get back to you. So yeah, that's a huge plus.
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, so basically you have the same set list every show because you can change because of your system that you use.
Not quite.
Oh.
I mean, we choose 90% of the time the set list is the same, mostly because it's the best version of the songs that we have. We try and create a journey from the beginning to the end. You know, we can't just play all out heavy, or you know, you have to have dynamics in the set. So we work hard to try and get a set list that works, that flows well, and that hits the right notes at the right time, and that allows people to breathe at certain points, and then you know send them off happy at the end of the day. So that's really the main that dictates how we set up the set list. Our system is very flexible. In fact, quite often there's maybe 3 or 4 points in the set where we rotate songs, but at any point I can shout and just say we're going to do this song next, or Chris is struggling with his voice, so he can't sing that song because it pushes his voice too much. He wants to save it for the end, so let's put a different song in. So that is very simple, and Miller can switch the whole trigger system at the flick of the switch, just kind of opening a new
drag
session.
and drop.
Yeah.
It was designed specifically with that in mind. That we could be halfway through a song and the set list can literally be dragged and dropped.
Yeah.
And we have something in each system for that. And the communication, this thing of you having a microphone and then I can tell the rest of the crew and then the lighting department will get to know and all of that kind of thing. So we do, it's this strange blend of, we do have a very rigid sort of show generally, because once things work and you get things working, we tend to repeat things, but then there is also this element that there could be a hand grenade appearing at any moment and you have to be able to jump on it.
Yeah.
And it's, it for the most part works really well, and we can, particularly it seems to happen in TV shows, like very early in the tour, we'll go to a TV show to do the single, and then there'll be an audience there, so once the cameras are off, you'll do 2 or 3 songs, and those are the moments where the set list gets made up on at the moment. And the whole system was designed so that we can do that. We can go from one thing to another.
Yeah,
just in
and it does work pretty well. So, and you have
The second, who is your influence as a drummer, and what was the biggest influence for you guys, like in the beginning of the career?
As a drummer, I mean, I still don't really consider myself a drummer. It's quite a strange. I've learned the drums in order to join the band because my friends needed a drummer, so I played other instruments like guitars and whatnot. So I suppose I listen. I don't really listen for drummers. I listen for something that supports a great song, because for me it's all about a melody and how can the band, especially the drummer, how can they deliver something which is interesting to listen to, but it doesn't detract from the song. Sometimes, I've known many wonderful, amazing drummers, but some of them struggle to play in bands because, you just want someone to just keep time and mark the sections and keep the solos to a minimum. But I always, starting out, maybe it was because of I wasn't very confident as a drummer to start out with. I would try and play as little as possible. I would try and wait. I'd say, I won't come in yet. Just as the song was written. Normally my signature is sort of coming in, hopefully after halfway. So I have to play as little as possible. Ideally, just the end. Because, then you have then someone said, well, that's important because you're making a musical decision. And in fact, it's benefiting the song because then when it does come in, it's a real release, And when I got to a point where about a year in, where I wasn't improving at all, and we were starting to do well as a band, and I wasn't keeping up with my bandmates in terms of my musical ability because I didn't have the basic training that most people did. So I went back and had a few lessons with a drum teacher, and he said exactly the same thing. These are all musical decisions that you make. Just because you don't, just because you're not playing the flashy fill-ins and the incredibly intricate breaks, it doesn't mean that you're not contributing to the overall sound of the music. And that's the thing for me. I try and remember that as much as possible. I don't want ever to ruin a song. I want to sit behind it and support the melody and support the song.
Cool.
Thank you. No worries.
Do you start the band or who starts the band?
There's a sort of section at the beginning. The first three sort of songs are set in one long session, as it were.
Yeah.
So we know that there's I know how long the gaps are. There's little bits of there's sort of incidental music that covers over the transitions. But then after that, it's me. There's a little camera that is right by my hi-hat that I can just give a little thumbs up, and that can be started. So I don't have access to the button itself, thank goodness.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that would be above my pay grade. But no, I make sure I give a signal to a guy who knows what he's doing. And that's what, and then he presses the button. Exactly.
I was going to ask, what's your opinion on people using the music that you've made and you've spent effort on to make other things? So like maybe they take a sample of one song. What's your opinion on their creative use?
I quite enjoy that sort of freedom it's just people should be free to use it. I think as long as you acknowledge it. But it's an interesting time now because there are lots of, I just read the other day about people acknowledging even written credits about sort of, I was influenced by this. It's not a direct, I'm not sampling it, I'm not covering it. It's just a sort of, just like a vibe, and there's been so many court cases recently where someone's been accused of stealing like a vibe. And how do you put money on that? So how much of this song, how much can you attribute to vibe? It's not the tempo's different, the beat's different. There are elements that obviously you can tell it's been inspired by, but it's not a lift. It's not a. So it's a very difficult thing to. And you'll always be the annoying thing is you'll always be able to find a lawyer, normally in America, who'll be able to argue a case for you. We've been on the end of that, and it's a horrible experience, knowing that someone is basically accusing you of stealing something which you know for a fact is not the case. And the reason I know in our case is because the guy who accuses us of it's such an obscure artist. I'm not technically allowed to talk about it, but it's so annoying that I will. This song had only been played on British radio 6 times in the history of, and we got a breakdown of on which radio station and where it was played and at what time, and we could prove that we weren't in whatever it is, BBC Radio Suffolk, but at midnight on a Tuesday. So we knew that there was no chance that we could have heard it on radio. The album sold about 1,200 copies in the UK. Again, we could prove that none of us had owned it. I mean, it's very difficult to say that you've never heard something because, his argument, this guy was like, well, maybe you heard it at a party. So I'm pretty sure I don't go to parties where your music is being played. So it was a really difficult. I mean, I can't tell you who it is, but you would be laughing as well. It's very strange, and we ended up having to. We didn't have to go to court in the end because we had to settle out of court. But the prospect of going to sit in front of a jury and trying to convince 12 people that these 2 pieces of music aren't similar, because that's what that's what it comes down to. It's not that no one can prove that we actually stole anything, just as they can't prove that we didn't. So it's down to 12 members of the public deciding whether actually 6 notes, it was 6 notes, whether they sound similar. And of course, most people who don't have any sort of idea of music will say, yeah, it does sound similar. But, there's only 12 notes in an octave, so there's only, you've got, 8 notes, excuse me. There's only, you only have a certain amount of things to play with. There's only a certain amount of combinations, You can play 12,000 different songs with the same 3 chords. That's music. There's only so much of it, and the way that you present it and the way that you dress it up is what makes it different. So it's a difficult one, that thing. But I think if you credit people and if you acknowledge when you have been inspired by something, then I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I love we've got to work with amazing people throughout our career, based on people liking some of the melodies that we use, or that's one of the things that I think we've got to work with incredible people, with Timbaland and Jay-Z and these people who react because they hear something that is interesting to them in our music, whether it's a melody or I think Chris writes fantastic piano melodies especially, and they lend themselves to sampling, and they lend themselves to be reinterpreted. Interesting people trying to use it and for inspiration. So I'm all for it. Just as long as you, yeah. But there's no shame in it. That's the history of art. It's all about standing on the shoulders of giants. No one owns those notes.
What's your writing process as a band like?
It varies really. Sometimes, traditionally it's been Chris spends huge amounts of time. He likes to think of it as kind of like fishing, where you have to put yourself in the right place in order to be ready for the inspiration when it comes. And so so occasionally he'll just be sat at the piano and the song will just arrive. It'll just come out fully formed, and we go to the studio, we record it, and it's done. Other times it will be, and more so recently, it'll be something to do with maybe if we're messing around in the studio, and I will write this fantastic bass line, or if it's a little drum beat, or a melodic idea on the guitar, or you'll be inspired by Dan is amazing at finding these keyboard sounds, sort of creating weird bespoke keyboard sounds, because we try now to not use anything that's a preset. No, you want to try and make something yourself. You want to try and, because if it's a preset, then everyone else could be using it as well. What you want is something that's individual and bespoke. So Dan is brilliant at that. So he'll be fiddling around and playing different keyboard sounds, and then I think then suddenly some sound might inspire you to write a certain chord, or certain chords sound better with certain sounds, and then things start happening. So more so, yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. It used to be just straight, Chris would come in with a song and lyrics, and we'd play it and we'd talk about it and we'd manipulate it a bit. But more often than not, of late, things come from rhythmic ideas or jams or a bit of programming here and there. But it's a lot depending on what you write on. I think what I found I use a thing called machina. It's like a drum programming. It's like a piece of hardware. So it's like a
NPC.
It is a bit like an NPC, but you can spread. You can put melodic instruments on it, so it's like a 4x4 grid of pads. But because of the way it's laid out, you immediately approach chords differently. On a piano you're used to certain shapes, triads or whatever, thirds and fifths and whatnot. But the way that if you have melodic instruments laid out in a completely different way, your fingers don't understand them in the same way, and you can write completely differently on different machines. But I think the thing that sticks with me, and as I was talking about earlier, the idea of fishing. Chris will always, 2 or 3 hours a day, he will just sit down, normally at a piano or a guitar, and just start playing. I think you have to put yourself in a position where you're ready to receive inspiration when it comes. Because just assuming that it's going to be, I'm going to write a song, and you just start, and if you give up after 5 or 10 minutes, it's not working, I'll go and do something else. I think you have to commit to putting yourself in the spot. It's like another analogy I was reading was about the idea of surfing. The guy who was comparing surfing to writing. You have to be out there ready to catch a wave. When you might not get one. It might be 2 hours and you don't get anything. But if you're not there ready to take it, you're never going to get that fantastic ride when it eventually comes. So I think the more time you put into it, the more likely you are to get something great.
I have one more question.
Sure.
When you guys realized that the band would become big, which song changed everything?
I can honestly say we were Chris and Johnny were playing together. We were all in the same kind of hall of residence, together at university. Chris and John started playing together in around the end of 97, or sort of mid of 97, and the first song I heard them play, I thought, no, this is not normal sort of student music. This is something that's got some real quality to it. And then I joined Guy joined a little bit later, and then I joined in January of '98. And from the first rehearsal, I just thought, this is real. This is actual music. This is music. It's not, I played with mates around school and things like that, but normally covers. And I'd never met anyone who had an ability to just write extremely brilliant songs right from the. Some of them were laughably bad at the beginning. Terrible. Sort of. Chris was really influenced. He loved Radiohead at the time, so everything was in that kind of angsty sort of world. But then the first song that the first album that all four of us kind of bonded over was an album by Jeff Buckley. So it's called Great, the album Grace, which is just a sensational recordings and the music.
There's a song which calls Last Goodbye.
Yeah, Last Goodbye. It's amazing. Yeah, absolutely incredible. And the players on it are brilliant. It's the first time we'd heard a great song in 3/4 in time signature. The song Grace itself. It's just such a absolute blinder, and that's one of our that was a huge inspiration for a song called Shiver that we have on our first album. So that was the first one that we all united over. And there were things like Bjork's first and second album were out there at the time, and Air, Moon Safari. Those are all these are the albums that we had on our stereo whenever we we'd rehearse in Johnny's bedroom until the neighbours got cross, and then we'd listen to music. So that was those were the records that we and also Neil Young, Harvest. It's a record called Harvest, which was a very important record for us. But yes, right from my first rehearsal, I remember I booked a gig that night. I phoned up a guy in a pub called the Laurel Tree, which is in Camden, and we had been a few weeks before to watch a friend's band. So I took the guy's card and I called him. So he said, well, you can have a gig next week. So we had 6 days from forming the band properly to our first show, and we gave flyers to all of our friends at university. And we came with like 150 people came to watch all of our friends, obviously.
And it was already original songs.
Yeah. We started with one cover. We used to do one cover in those early days, which was the James Bond theme, You Only Live Twice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, everything was original songs. But we only had 6 songs. So in our first gig, because it was all of our mates there, when we finished, everyone was clapping and cheering and asking for another song. We said we don't have any more songs, so we had to play one of them again. We played the second song again. But it was right from the beginning. I think we knew that it was going to be something that we wanted to do forever. Cool. Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your questions. How did I do, Master?
A star.
Great.
Just a very quick thank you from me to Will and Dan and Miller and to the inspirational stuff. I found it fascinating. I hope you guys did too. Massively appreciated. These guys have literally just got back from California and they're about to go to South America for the next run of shows. They've been on tour for 2 years and they spared time to come to us today, so that's a mega honour for me and I hope for you guys too.